Hello my dear viewer, and welcome to a new video. Let's sew a lovely autumn shirt with pumpkins. To make this shirt I used a grasser pattern. You'll find the link in the description below. As usual, don't forget to wash and press your beautiful fabric first, so the shirt won't shrink after its first wash. My fabric is 100% cotton. I cut one front piece and two plackets. The left one is a little bit longer than the right one, so I cut two identical pieces and then crop the right placket's lower edge by 1 cm. Then I cut a back piece, two neckband and two yoke pieces. If you, like me, have a beautiful design printed on your fabric, make sure your shirt parts are cut according to it, not upside down. And don't forget to transfer all the markings from the pattern. I also cut two sleeves, two cuffs and two sleeve band bindings. As I've already sewn a mock-up earlier and realized that the sleeves were too long for me, I shortened the cuffs pattern by 4 cm from two sides, where it should be sewn on to a sleeve later. Unfortunately, my camera stopped working at that point. My next step was cutting out some fusible interfacing pieces. I needed one neckband, two plackets and two cuffs. The interfacing shouldn't be too light or too heavyweight. I've used the interfacing to the outer neckband piece and then strengthened its outer edge with a fusible bias tape. Then fused the interfacing to the plackets and cuffs. I strengthened the front piece vent's lower edge with an interfacing lengthwise thread tape. I also drew a line 1 cm away from the vent. This should be a seam's end. Bend the plackets in half, wrong sides inside and press. Use the pattern and don't be confused which placket should be on which side. Then pin the plackets to the vent's edges, right sides inside, and stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Press the seams flat and then turn them to the plackets and press again. Make 2 diagonal cuts like it is shown in the video. And turn the placket's raw edges to the shirt's wrong side. Tuck the seam allowance under and secure it with some pins. The placket should cover the first seam by 1 or 2 mm. I recommend securing this piece with hand stitches and remove the pins. Stitch in the ditch between the placket and the shirt's front part, so the seam is invisible from the right side and secures the seam allowance at its wrong side. Repeat these steps for the other side. Tuck the vent's lower edge seam allowance to the wrong side. Put the right placket on the left one and press. Then pin 2 plackets together so they won't shift. Turn the thing to the wrong side. I also secured the placket's ends together with hand stitches. Then made a seam on my machine. When done with the seam, make sure everything is okay at the shirt's right side. Then trim the placket's edges just a little bit to trim off the ends. Tuck the longer one in 2 times over the shorter one to have a nice and clean edge. Then secure the thing with hand stitches. Let's move on to the back. Pin the outer yoke to the back piece right sides inside. Then add the inner yoke to the sandwich, its right side to the back's wrong side. Stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Press the seam flat first and then turn it to the wrong side of our inner yoke, like it is shown in the video. Make a machine seam 1 mm off the inner's yoke edge, thus securing it to the seam allowance. Don't forget to press the seam. Then press the outer yoke up its wrong side to the inner yoke's wrong side. Pin the shoulder edges of the outer yoke and front piece together and stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Then tuck the inner yoke's edge in, so all the raw edges are inside, as it is shown in the video. It is not so easy but manageable if you turn the shoulder seam gradually inside out. Then stitch on top of already existing shoulder seam. Repeat the same steps for the other shoulder and press. I also like to make the seams flat by cooling them using my homemade tailor's hams. I mark 1 cm off the neckband's edge, we'll need it later, and pin 2 pieces together at their curved edge. Then stitch with a 7 mm seam allowance, starting and ending the seam 1 cm off the edge using the markings we made earlier. Press the seam flat. Trim the excess seam allowances at the curved angles by half and turn the neckband out. Make a neat edge with your fingers and secure it with hand stitches. Press. Pin the outer neckband piece to the shirt's neck and stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Cut the seam allowance several times. That would help us when turning it out without wrinkles. Press the seam flat and then turn the seam allowance to the neckband and press again. Tuck the inner neckband's seam allowance under, so it covers the seam by 1 or 2 mm and secure it with pins and hand stitches. Stitch in the ditch at the right side of the shirt, thus securing the inner neckband's seam allowance. Press the neckband and remove all hand stitches. Let's move on to our sleeves. First, I made a vent in the sleeve according to the pattern and pinned a sleeve band binding to its edges, stepping 1 cm off the binding shorter edge. Stitch with a 7 mm seam allowance. I find doing it easier with 2 seams, starting and ending at the center of the vent. Press the seam flat and then turn the seam allowance to the binding. Roll the binding twice to the sleeve's wrong side, secure it with pins and hand stitches. Stitch in the ditch at the right side of the sleeve. Press the seams flat. The sleeve's vent has two parts, the upper one and the lower one. The upper one should be bent under. It is the one on the longer side of the sleeve's edge. Make a knit edge with your fingers and press. Repeat for the second sleeve. Cut off the excess vent binding ends. I made 2 pleats on the lower edge of each sleeve using the pattern markings. Then secured these pleats and the vent's band edge with a 7 mm seam allowance. After that, I connect the sleeves with the shirt's body at the sleeves cap's right sides and side. Use the markings. Stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Then I hem the edges with an overlock. Press the seams flat and then turn the seam allowances to the sleeve and press again. Use some tailor's hems for convenience. Pin the sleeve and side seams in one go, right sides and side, so that the underarm seams coincide perfectly. Stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Hem the edges with an overlock. Press the seams flat and then turn the seam allowances to the front side of the shirt. I drew a chalk line 2 cm off the shirt's bottom and pressed the edge to this line. Then bend the edge under one more time and stitched 1 cm off the bent edge. Don't forget to press the seam. Let's make the cuffs. I pin them to the sleeves right sides and side, stepping 1 cm off the cuff's both long edges. Stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Press the seams flat and then turn the seam allowances to the cuffs. Pin the cuffs short sides together, right sides inside, and stitch with a 7 mm seam allowance. Cuffs' long side seam allowances should be bent under. Press the seams flat. Turn the cuffs out and make neat edges with your fingers. Tuck the cuffs seam allowance under, so it covers the seam by 1 or 2 mm, and secure it with pins and hand stitches. Then press. Stitch in the ditch at the right side of the shirt, thus securing the cuffs seam allowance. Press the seam and remove all hand stitches. Our last step is sewing on 9 snaps, using the pattern markings. Each snap has 2 parts. There are 4 snaps on the placket, 1 on the neckband and 4 on the cuffs. And that's it! Thank you so much for watching! In my next video, I'll show you how to sew a skirt to match this shirt. Bye!